Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. We left off yesterday with Absalom finally being apparently brought back into the good graces of his father, but today we're going to talk about Absalom's rebellion. And picking up right where we left off, chapter 15, verse 1, after this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. Remember that, that'll come up later. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. When any man who had a dispute would come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such a city of a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." And Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were the judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or a cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put his hand out, take hold of him, and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So check this out. Absalom has a chariot, hires 50 men to run before him everywhere he goes so that he looks really important. And then he stations himself outside the gate of kind of the city of the king. And he's like, "What are you here for?" And they're like, "Well, I need to talk to the king about something." And he goes, "Oh man, if only the king had appointed somebody to talk to you, but the king doesn't have anybody. If only I was the judge, you could talk to me and I would take care of you." And people would come up to him and go, "Oh man, you're so great." And he would lift them up and he'd kiss them. And he's showing them this attention. He's pretending like David doesn't have time for him. And you notice this in verse 6, it says, "So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel." Now, he's still in it one heart at a time. But then the next verse says this, at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, I will tell you, some of your translations will say at the end of 40 years. Some of them will say 4 years, but then have a footnote. It can't be at the end of 40 years. It can't be that Absalom did this for 40 years. There are two other possibilities, okay? One, at the end of 4 years is how some people render it. Some translators render it, that Absalom did this for 4 years. The other possibility is that David is going to be a king for 40 years total. And so it could be that at the end of 40 years, like this is at the very end of David's reign. I think that this is at the end of David's 40 years of reign, but probably not the very last year, right? So this is close to that. But probably what this is meant to be is 4 years. The Hebrew numbers, a lot of these in the old, they dropped out. It's harder. It's missing in the text. So 40 years doesn't make sense because that's all that David's going to be king, probably 4 years. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived in Geshur." That was the 3 years he lived away from his father. "If the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord." So Absalom, remember this, he lived away from his dad for 3 years, came back to Jerusalem and lived there for 2 years before he saw his dad. And now it's been another 4 years. He's been back in Jerusalem for 6 years. And he goes, "Hey, Dad, I just remembered when I was in Geshur, when I was fleeing from you, I made a vow to God that if he ever brings me back to Jerusalem, I would make an offering to him." Absalom's been there for 6 years. If he had wanted to make an offering to God, he could have. This is all part of his plan. He says, I made a promise that I would do that. So the king said to him, verse 9, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, say, Absalom is king in Hebron." So why Hebron? Why this? Do you remember? It's because when King Saul died, where was David first made king? He was first made king of Judah in Hebron. And then later, 7.5 years later, would be made king over all of Israel. So Absalom is kind of like following in his father's footsteps. And he's like, I'm going to become king in Hebron. And then I will steal Israel from my father. With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence knowing nothing. So Absalom goes, "Guys, I'm having a party today. Why don't you guys come?" And they go. While Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor from the city of Gilo, and the conspiracy grew stronger, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. A messenger came to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." And David said, "Arise and let us flee." And so David and his servants are fleeing from Absalom, and he went out of his household. And it says this, the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And so the king went out, all the people after him. And I love this, verse 19. There's this guy following him, Ittai the Gittite. It's one of my favorite little stories in the Bible. It says, "Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, 'Why are you going along with us? go back and stay with the king. So at this point, this reference right here, David is referring to Absalom as king. He goes, why are you following me? Go and stay with the king, for you're a foreigner and exile from your home. Ittai the Gittite, he says, you came only yesterday. Shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go where I know not? And go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show you steadfast love and faithfulness to you. And so here's the situation. David and his men are fleeing. Ittai the Gittite is coming with David. David goes, look, dude, go back into Jerusalem, stay with the king, King Absalom. And he goes, you just got here yesterday. Why are you going to follow me? I don't even know where I'm going yet. But verse 21, but Ittai said, as the Lord lives and as my Lord the king lives, wherever my Lord the king shall be, whether for life or for death, there shall your servant be also. So in other words, he says to David, he goes, look, as long as God lives and as long as you, the king, live, he doesn't acknowledge Absalom as king. He acknowledges David as king. He goes, I will follow you wherever you go, whether it means life or death for me. So Ittai follows along with him, and Abiathar and Zadok, the priest, they come up to David and they say, hey, we'll go with you too. And they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant with him. He goes, nope, I need you to go back into the city, leave the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. We're not going to take the Ark of the Covenant out. God will bring me back here, and God will make everything right. And he goes, otherwise, I need you, Zadok, to go back. I need you, Abiathar, to go back, and I need you to confound the counselors of Absalom and also report to me. Let me know what he's planning. So David says this in verse 27, the king said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Go back into the city in peace with your two sons, Ahimaaz your son and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. I will wait for you at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So they go back into the city to kind of thwart the counselors of Absalom and also to report to David what Absalom is planning. Jump down to chapter 16. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys. Now, we didn't talk about Mephibosheth. We covered him in passing in one verse, but Mephibosheth, we find in 2 Samuel 9, 1 through 13, he is the son of Jonathan, David's friend who died. And Mephibosheth was crippled and lame. He was 5 years old when King Saul died. Part of the reason that we know that this is at the very end of David's life is David, at this point, Mephibosheth is married. Mephibosheth has children of his own. And Mephibosheth is this character in the Bible who lived in Lodabar. And that word Lodabar means nothing. Mephibosheth lived in Lodabar, and David invited Mephibosheth to come and dine at his table. And so David has been taking care of Mephibosheth this whole time. The servant of Mephibosheth is Ziba, and there's some drama between them. Jump down here to 16:5. When David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, of the Benjamites, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he continually cursed. And he threw stones at David and all the servants of the king David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. Keep in mind, David didn't put anybody of the house of Saul to death. No one. And so this guy who is of Saul's line is like, finally, you're getting your comeuppance. This is, remember, closer to 40 years after the death of Saul. And he says this in verse 8, Shimei does, the Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. Your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head. And the king, remember, Abishai is always the guy who's like, let me just put him to death. Let me just put the spear through Saul. Let me just deal with this guy. And the king says, what do I have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? I always imagine David being like, are you kidding me, dude? Still more of this? Come on, man. If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, then who shall say to him, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai and to all of his servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now this Benjamite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for perhaps the Lord has told him to do so. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. So Absalom enters Jerusalem. He's followed by a horde of people that he's gathered together. And Absalom says to Ahithophel, the counselor who used to be the counselor for David, is now the counselor for Absalom. He says, what should I do? What's the first thing that I should do? And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go and sleep with your father's concubines who you left to keep the house. All of Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and all the hands who are with you will be strengthened. So he says this, go sleep with those 10 maidservants that your father left behind. Everybody will hear you that you did that, and then they'll know, okay, Absalom has really broken away from his father, and the hearts of those who are following Absalom will be strengthened. Like, yeah, this is our guy. Look how bold he is. So it says this in verse 22. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. This is like a public display that he does. Now, you're wondering, what in the world is going on here? This was actually prophesied by God in 2 Samuel 12. Remember when David committed adultery with Bathsheba and then had her husband murdered? And the rebuke to David in 2 Samuel 12 was, you did this in private, but somebody else will take your wives and sleep with them in public. That's this right here. Verse 23 then says, now in those days, the counsel of Ahithophel, that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of the Lord. So it was esteemed both by David and Absalom. So Ahithophel then says, hey, look, I want you to chase your dad, take 12,000 men, chase your dad down, hunt him down like a dog tonight, kill your dad, and the whole war will be over. But remember that God left Hushai behind, or David left Hushai behind to kind of deal with this, to confuse the counsel of Absalom. And he goes, no, look, he goes, your dad is a man of warfare. Your dad is trained in war. If you go after him tonight, your dad is hidden in one cave or another. He will come upon you and he'll defeat you. This is good counsel. This is the counsel where he's trying to save David. And he says, you need to wait until all of Israel is gathered to you. Then you can go hunt down your dad. And so they send messengers to David. They said, look, you got to hide because Ahithophel counseled Absalom to come and get you tonight. So you got to hide just in case he follows that. He goes, but what I counseled him is to wait until the entire army of Israel is gathered. You've got some time. And so David goes and he hides. This is the Psalm, Psalm 3. This is the Psalm that David wrote when he was fleeing from his son Absalom. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying, O my soul, of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter up of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from the holy hill. I lay down and I slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, and save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. Remember, here he's talking about his son. And you break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord, and your blessing be on your people. So David gets all of his soldiers together. So keep in mind that Absalom has been saying, kill only David. I'm only concerned with David. Kill only my father. When it's time for them to come to war, this is chapter 18 and 19. When it's time for them to come to war, David says, he goes, go to war, but deal gently with Absalom. He's my son. Don't harm Absalom. So Absalom and David have different approaches. Absalom is like, just kill David and the men will come after me, and the men will be under my leadership then, because there's no dispute about who's the king. David says, look, I know we're going to war. Kill whoever you got to kill, just don't kill Absalom. So they go to war, and Absalom is fleeing in battle. Remember, he has long, lustrous hair. We saw that yesterday. And it says that his head gets caught in a tree, and it's tangled by his hair, and he's hanging from this tree. He's riding his mule under a tree. His head and his hair get caught in this tree, and it rips him off of his mule, and he's just hanging there. And somebody comes to Joab, and they said, look, hey man, I saw Absalom. He's stuck in a tree over there. And Joab goes, why didn't you kill him? And the man says to Absalom, he goes, because I heard David say don't kill him. That's why I didn't kill him. And Joab goes, no, we're going to deal with this right now. Joab takes 3 spears and pierces them into the heart of Absalom. And then the men take him down from the tree, and they basically hack him and beat him. He's dead, but they continue to desecrate his body, and they throw him into a pit. And then there's this guy, Ahimaaz, who says to Joab, let me run to the king. Let me tell the king what happened. And Joab goes, no, it's not for you to bring this kind of message to him. This is too hard of a message. So Joab sends a different guy, a runner, to bring a message to David to say, hey, look, your son's dead. The war's over. And Ahimaaz goes, look, let me at least go also. And so the one guy runs to David to bring him the message. And then Ahimaaz comes running, goes a different way, and is faster, outruns the other guy. And Ahimaaz gets to David, and he says, hey, he goes, I want you to know. Oh, and it's super funny. They say, hey, I see a man running on the hill, and his running is like the running of Ahimaaz. And this has always made me laugh, that from a distance, no telescope, no binoculars, from a distance, you see Ahimaaz running on a hill, and his run is so distinct, you're like, yep, that's the running of Ahimaaz. And I just think, man, he must have run really strangely. It must have been a really weird run. Ahimaaz shows up and David goes, is it well with you? And he goes, it's well. God has given you victory over your enemies. And David goes, what about my son Absalom? And Ahimaaz lies. And he goes, there was a great tumult next to where I was. I don't know what happened though. Lie, right? Just totally lies. Doesn't want to bring the bad news. And then the other guy comes up and David says, what happened to my son? And he goes, I hope all of the king's enemies will be like that young man. And so David grieves that his son Absalom is dead and weeps over it. Joab in chapter 19 rebukes him and he says, you would have rather all of us died today than your son. And he goes, and if you don't go out and speak to your people right now and thank them for their service to you, you won't have a single man who follows you tomorrow. And so David goes out and he thanks the men for their service, and David will return to Jerusalem in triumph, but also broken. And so it's just interesting that like David's sons are such a thorn in his flesh, right? Such a thorn in his side. And it kind of speaks to David a little bit, because the pattern that we see is that David never rebukes his sons for their sin. And I have always wondered, I don't know if this is the case or not, but I've always wondered if it's because David sees his own sin, sees his own failure. But David, not a great dad, and his sons, not great people so far. And unfortunately, that'll continue to be the case. But join me tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be in 2 Samuel 21 and 22, and also in Psalm 18. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.